Thank you very much, Gabriel. Appreciate it. Let me also say welcome to everyone for joining today's session in Power BI. I know that, or we know that your time is very precious and you could have been spending it doing something else, but you chose to be with us. And for that, we are really, really thankful. Okay, well, as usual, whenever I do any webinar sessions, I always say that we're going to have fun. So I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I hope that you all can see the screen. So what are we going to do today? Well, what we're going to do is first we're going to analyze some data in an Excel spreadsheet. And then looking at the Excel spreadsheet, try and determine, is there any way we can actually present this data within the Power BI desktop, maybe using a particular visual control. And the visual control that we'll be actually using today is the matrix visual control. And in looking at the matrix visual control, we'll be looking at any parameters or any conditional formatting, etc., that we will be able to carry to this visual control to therefore make it a little bit pleasing. So what I will do first is to really show you the end where we would like to get to. And then from there, we will go back to the beginning and see how we can transform this data. So I'm hoping, as I said, you're actually seeing my screen. So if you're seeing my screen, here is where we want to get to. I'm here looking at Power BI desktop with three controls, three visuals, or what you call visualizations as listed here. You'll notice in my visualization panel, I'm given all these various controls that we can use, these visuals. And if I highlight this particular visual, you'll notice that there's a border around this control or this visual, which is called the matrix. So if I'm looking here at a matrix which is able to show my data, both in a tabular form, as well as by way of bars, how can we do that? And I'm saying that, yes, this is very possible, and we're going to be doing it using data which comes from an Excel spreadsheet. So therefore, for us, the question is, for today, how can we therefore transform this data? Let me just close this. How can we transform this data so that I'm looking at all of this data which is in an Excel spreadsheet, and to bring it to some kind of a matrix data that is able to, it is able to allow me to visually represent my Excel spreadsheet, because as we know, the adage, a picture says 1,000 words. So again, I'll just give you an idea of this particular visual, which is called the matrix. And we're just going to concentrate on the matrix today, and then we're going to see what kind of magic we can work with the matrix, starting with just an Excel spreadsheet. So here I am. I'm just opened an Excel spreadsheet. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in Power BI, as you know, the Power BI desktop is a free application from Microsoft that you can download. And the reason why it's free, it's because the Power BI desktop really is an application that you can use on your desktop. But the minute you're talking about creating reports or visuals or dashboards that you want to share within the organization, then you now have to integrate the Power BI desktop with other tools, other related tools. For example, the Power BI service, which will therefore allow you to publish your desktop application, which was meant for your eyes only, but you're now able to publish it to a group or to another individual within your organization or even outside your organization. And that, sadly, as you would expect, would not be free. But the Power BI desktop is a tool with all the functionality of Power BI, which allows you therefore to create your visuals and your dashboards. So I'm using an Excel spreadsheet as our sample data, which is called AdventureWorks Sales. As a matter of fact, this is data that you can actually download freely off the internet. So as you are learning your Power BI, all you have to do is just go into Google and just do a search in Google, maybe to type sample Power BI data. Then you will see a ton loads of sample data that you can actually download. So this Excel spreadsheet file, which is the AdventureWorks sales, was literally downloaded from the internet. So that is the data that we'll be using as our data source for today's presentation. So if we look at this Excel workbook, you'll notice that the workbook has several worksheets. And it's important that I make that distinction because many times, many people use these terminologies loosely. So you say, okay, an Excel spreadsheet, all that is fine, yes, but there are times when you have to be cognizant or you have to be aware of the specific terminologies. An Excel spreadsheet, as we normally loosely define it, is really properly referred to as an Excel workbook. And then within a specific workbook, there are several worksheets. And why I have to go through this is because each worksheet, when you make that transformation to Power BI, each worksheet will actually be seen as a data table. So let's just quickly analyze our data. We're seeing here that this workbook has a worksheet called sales order data, which basically gives us information on all sales orders, for example, the channels which are being used. So therefore here we have channels, internet, and reseller. And I'm hoping that as we're going through this exercise using this workbook, you're able to see, or you're able to translate in your own thoughts and minds, how therefore can you use your own Excel spreadsheets within your organization and in your own environment, and then to represent them in Power BI. So here we're noticing that we're seeing internet and resellers channels. So therefore it's possible that maybe we can analyze our data by way of sales channel. So we're seeing here information on the sales order and the sales order line. Also, we're seeing here sales territory data. So maybe we're able to analyze our channels based on the regions and the country, and also group. So looking here, I can see that we can actually do a sorting and a grouping. So maybe you'd want to analyze your North American sales, which in this case would be able to split sales between the United States and Canada. And then even within the countries within the group, you can also have regions. So regions are a subset of country based on this Excel spreadsheet. And the country is a subset of groups. So this is very interesting data. And we're looking here as well as actual sales data. And very interesting. And maybe we're looking at reseller data. So maybe if we want to do some analysis of our resellers. And there's also a table which gives us a date range. Now, in Power BI or with any dashboards, you'll find that one of the most important functions is the ability to represent data in what we call in temporal manner or temporal fashion, meaning the ability to represent data by some kind of a date factor, whether if it is by year or half yearly, or maybe by quarters, by month, by week, etc. So that kind of data is called temporal data. And it's good also that when you're analyzing data, you are able to either import some kind of a data table with a range of data records in it, or you can actually use the inbuilt functionality of Power BI to create a table which will have your records, your date records. And let me hasten to say that in one of our future presentations, we will actually show you how to create data using the inbuilt functionality of Power BI rather than you having to actually create a table with data records. And here again, we also have information on the product data. So as we're looking through our data here in our worksheet or various worksheets, you're seeing that we can probably analyze data by sales and to include the products, so maybe the type of products for each region. So you might be able to look at, for example, this column here, which says category. So you're able to analyze your clothing sales for the North American region of Canada, for example. So once you're seeing, there's very interesting, a lot of interesting data here. And also we have data on our customers. So there's so much that we can do as it relates to mix and match. So it therefore means we can analyze, for example, who is our best customer in say, let me get rid of this, in say the North American region, or maybe in Australia, the United States, and what particular items they are selling. So now that we have all of this Excel data, I'm just going to minimize this. Remember, we're saying that let us use, how can we transform this data by putting it in some kind of a visual? And the visual that we're going to be concentrating on today is the visual called the matrix. So as we go through the step-by-step process, I'm going to now start a new session of Power BI. Now, why am I starting a new session of Power BI? It is good while you're learning Power BI, for example, if you can download sample projects, and in you downloading the sample projects, you can literally open them and use them as a reference point, so that as you're learning the product and learning the tool, you can actually use it as a reference. So I'm going to show you how you can do that today. So here, I'm just going to close this. And this is our Power BI environment. And this is our Power BI desktop. So you'll notice that you have 3 panes here on the left, one which says report, which literally shows the canvas. So this canvas is what is used to actually build your reports. The next, you'll notice that there is a panel called data. Once data is imported, all your data will show here, but right now it's blank. So there's an expectation that when we import that Excel spreadsheet with all the data that we looked at, then we should expect to see all the data represented here in this pane. And then thirdly, we have what is called the model. Now, inside the model, what you will see is a graphical representation of what is called table relationships. For example, if we have a sales order table, the sales order table is probably to a particular customer. So if it is to a customer, then there's probably some kind of a customer table. So as we will see when we import the data, we're able to see the relationship between the customer table and the orders table. And that key field, which probably joins those 2 tables together, or which relates those 2 tables together, would probably be the customer order. So you'd expect to see the customer number. So you'd expect to see the customer number in the customers table, as well as the customer number in the orders table. And it is that kind of table relationship which allows you, therefore, to analyze your orders by customers. But all this we'll see when we run our example. So we're now going to import our data. Now, in importing our data, you'll notice that we have here this icon which says Get Data. You can click the Get Data, and the drop-down lists what is called the common data sources. In other words, what usually are the data types which are most common out there in the world. And you'll see, for instance, you can select Excel worksheets, Power BI data sets, SQL Server, or even text files. If, however, you do not see your data source type in the list, then you can just click the More button. And then when you click the More button, you will actually see a Get Data window appearing. And the Get Data window will actually list all your data types by way of categories. So if you select all, you'll get a listing, a full listing of the data types. Now, let me hasten to say this, that the developers of Power BI are always improving the product. So don't be surprised if when you upgrade the product, you actually see more data types being listed. If your data type, if the list is too cumbersome for you, you can actually view your data type, view your data by way of the categories. So for instance, if we choose the file category, under the file category, you have your listing of data types that you're able to select. In this case, we might want to use the Excel workbook. And you'll notice it says here Excel workbook and not Excel spreadsheet or Excel worksheet, because this actually is the correct terminology. So if I select Excel workbook and then hit connect, I'm now saying that I'm going to my computer into the Power BI folder. And then within the Power BI folder, I will see my Excel spreadsheet, which we looked at, which is called the AdventureWorks Sales. So I select the AdventureWorks Sales and click open. So what is happening here at this point is that a navigator window will now open. And once the navigator window opens, you will now see a list of all the Excel worksheets that belong to the Excel workbook listed, and you can therefore select. So what we have done, or what we're going to be actually doing here, is starting the process of data selection and data cleansing. So why am I saying this? If I should highlight, for example, the customer, I'm seeing a list of all the customers as was represented in the Excel worksheet. So our first step in data cleansing is our ability to select only the tables that you would need for your presentation. From my perspective, just for today's session, what I will do is just select all the tables. So as I'm going through the customer data, definitely we'll need the data, product data, reseller data, sales order data, sales territory, and sales data. So I'm saying here that I'm going to be selecting all, because really I don't know what data that I need, and I wouldn't want to be short on my data, as I wouldn't be able to build my data model. So again, this is actually the first step in the process of data cleansing, and that step is really called data selection. So I've selected all my tables. Now at the bottom right, you'll notice 3 buttons. As usual, as understandably rather, cancel means you're going to cancel the process. But there are 2 buttons here, load and transform data. And what's the difference between the two? When you select the load button, you are therefore making an assumption that your data as selected in the navigator window, you are assuming that your data has no issues with it, that all is well, all is fine. So therefore, if you know your data source, where it is coming from, and the integrity of the data, then you could just simply click load. And by clicking load, it will move the data and create your data model within the Power BI desktop. In other words, in the canvas region that is behind here, as you're seeing here. However, that usually tends not to be the case, especially when you're importing data from a source that you do not know. So there's an expectation that you might want to transform the data. So what does a transform data do? The transform data button takes your data and then loads it, right, in a Power Query editor, a tool that facilitates you looking at the data and determining if your data is clean or whether you might need to do some transforming process. Let me give an example. In the United States, a date field is usually in the format month first, date, the day of the month second, and the year. But in England and in other places of Europe, across Europe, a date is actually in the format day first, then month, then year. So if you saw a record which said 5/2/2021, good. The question therefore is that record saying the 2nd of May 2021 or the 5th of February 2021? You would not know. And therefore, without doing some kind of data cleansing, you might end up bringing in data, good, which is all skewed or will be totally incorrect. And therefore, you'd have managers making strategic decisions which might be based on faulty data. So we're actually going to transform our data. And by clicking the transform data, you'll see a window here which says processing queries. So what is happening here? Power BI is really running a query in the background, which will read your Excel spreadsheet workbook, which will read your Excel workbook and bring in all the Excel worksheets into an environment that you're able to edit the data. And when it brings that data, as it has done here, 1 second, please. Right, as it has done here, you will see that what's represented on the left is a listing of all the worksheets that we looked at in Excel, but now they're called tables. Good. They're called tables within the Power Query editor. So here's the heading. We're now in the Power Query editor, which is separate from the Power BI desktop. So let me move this around and you can see. So now that we have brought in our data, good, there are several tools that are given to you by Power BI in order for you to assess if your data has some amount of integrity. And you're able to do that by clicking on the view button. And then in clicking on the view button, there are 3 particular options that I would like you to look at. One which is called the column quality, one which is called the column distribution, and the third which is called the column profile. So let's highlight the first one, which is called the column quality. The purpose of the column quality, as you'll notice, when I click the column quality, you will see here in this region, good, this graphic with 3 buttons, which speaks of valid, error, and empty. So this explains really what column quality is, in that Power BI is able to look at your data and evaluating each record in each field along with other records within the field. It makes a statistical determination whether each column in your table might have suspect data. In other words, there might be issues of you having invalid data. So it will display whether what percentage of your data seems valid. In this case, it gave 100%. It will also display what it suspects of as data having errors within it, or whichever fields might be empty, and which rows within the field rather will be empty. And this is a good visualization tool for you, because you have to go through these steps to determine if your data might be suspect. So here we're just quickly going to go through and scan, and we're not seeing anything which looks like potential errors. And we're going through the date table and going across our columns. And in looking, we're seeing that we're still at 100%. And we'll probably just look at maybe sales just to bring the point across. So far as we're looking at this, the data quality seems to look good, as all fields are displaying 100% value as being valid, and there were no errors detected, and there were no fields which are empty, which is good. So the next assessment option, in addition to column quality, is what is called the column distribution. Now, what is the column distribution able to tell us, for example? The column distribution is able to determine whether there are outliers within a group. Now, what is an outlier? Just a little statistics, for those of you who are maybe familiar with the statistical term, you may remember this term called normal data, or the normal bell curve. Data tends, or a group of data records tend to follow some normal distribution. And from that, you're able to assess if data is what is called an outlier. An outlier is a record or a group of records that seem to be outside of what is normal. So you are able to use the column distribution to get an idea of your records. Are they properly normalized? Do they look reasonable? Or is there something which is outside of the ordinary? We're not seeing anything outside of the ordinary when we use the column distribution. And the third view is what is called the column profile. So the column profile looks at things like the valid distribution of the records, how many distinct records you have versus unique records, what is the minimum and maximum, and what is average, etc. So it's basically statistical data, how many records there are even numbers versus odd numbers, also the standard deviation. So this might seem like much, but the fact is that it is recommended that when you bring in data, that you subject your data to this level of analysis. That is the column quality, the column distribution, and column profile. So we have gone through these three views, and we have come to the conclusion that our data looks good and there's nothing else that needs to change. So now that we have that data, we need now to move that data from our Power Query editor to our Power BI desktop. And how do we do that? Under the Home tab, you'll notice that there's a button called Close and Apply. So what close and apply will do, close and apply will actually now take this data that is within our Power Query editor, because it's assumed that we have done all the necessary data cleansing. There are other data cleansing techniques, but we will go through those in another session because we want to show how you can apply this data and create our visual. So I can hit now close and apply. So as I hit close and apply, I'm seeing a window coming up, pop-up window, which now says load. So our data is now, after it is transformed, it's now being brought in the Power BI desktop. And I want you to take particular note of this panel here, which is called Fields. On the right-hand side, right, Fields is currently empty. There's nothing there. So there's an expectation that once the process has ended and all our data brought over from the Power Query editor, we should now see the list of tables which can be used in our visual presentation here in the Fields pane. So let's just give it a minute for it to bring over the table. Good. So all good so far. So now what has changed from our opening canvas? Because you'd want to say, okay, nothing really has changed except one critical thing, in that when we opened our Power BI desktop, which was just an empty canvas, there were no fields, good, for us to put any data. So if you look at our fields lists, or rather our tables lists, which would constitute our fields, these are the same tables which would be coming from the Power Query editor, which would be the same tables coming across from our Excel spreadsheet. So we have now transformed our data from our Excel spreadsheet to our fields panel. Now let us look. If I should now hit my data link, you remember before it was blank, but now we're seeing the transformed data which is coming over from the Power Query editor. So if I should highlight any of my tables, I'm seeing my fields, I'm able to expand my tables, I'm seeing my fields list, etc. So whereas before it was blank, now we have data. Now let's open our model. Again, before the model was blank, but now we see data that has not only been brought across by way of its tables, but we now have what is called the relationship diagram between the tables. And we'll just quickly go through this relationship diagram and using one example to determine, okay, just what is this saying? If we look at, for example, the sales territory data table, which is our list of territories within these fields, the country, the group, the region, sales territory, we notice that there is a line moving between the sales territory table and the sales data table. And if we want to get an idea of just what is this relationship, if I should just put the mouse over the line, you'll notice that the line has no a yellow color, and it has automatically highlighted the sales territory key in the sales territory table and the sales territory key in the sales data table. So what is this saying? This is saying that between the sales territory data table and the sales data table, there is a one to many. That's what the asterisk means. There's a one to many relationship between the sales territory data table and the sales data table. And the relationship between these two tables is the field called sales territory key. Now, why is it one-to-many relationship? We're saying here is that for every sales territory key, which represents a sales territory, for every single record of a sales territory, there are many sales territory records in the sales data. And if you should really think of it, that would make sense. For example, if a sales territory were Miami, then you would only need to have a record representing Miami one time within the sales territory data table. However, within your sales data, you would have many sales for one customer or many sales for many customers that do come from the Miami region or the Miami territory. So that is why you may have many records which represent the many sales in Miami. So hence, it's very reasonable to understand that this is a one-to-many relationship between the sales territory and data. So now that we have this, and by the way, if you want to edit a relationship, all you'd have to do is to highlight the line, double-click the line, and then you will see the edit relationship window coming up, and then you can actually edit the relationship. For example, if you believe that the relationship between the two fields are different or should be different, you can actually, using the drop down across the two tables, establish the proper relationship between the two tables. But in most data that you bring across, Power BI is able to sense and, using algorithms, determine the relationship across tables. So now that we have looked at our model and we have done an overview of our data, it's now time to build our canvas. Now, as again, let's look back at what we have here. We said in our Power BI demo, we'll be looking at this particular control or visual, which is called a matrix. Good. And if we look at this matrix visual, you'll notice that it uses three tables. It uses the product table, the reseller table, and the sales table. And if you'd like to know the specific fields that it is using within each table, you just expand the table and you'll see that it's using the category field from the product table. It is also using the business type field from the reseller table. And if I should scroll a little, I'm saying here that in the sales table, it is using the sales amount fields. So we shall use the same approach and see if we can do an evaluation on the reseller and the sales. So going back. So how do we do that? The first thing that we need to do is to bring our visual onto our canvas. So here in our visualizations pane, we put our mouse over and you'll notice it says here matrix. So by clicking matrix, I'm seeing here that it wrote the matrix, or rather it copied the matrix visual onto the canvas. And what we can do is basically expand. So we want now to put some data on this. So the first thing I'm going to do with this matrix is to just literally just put some tabular data similar to the example. So if we go back again, you'll notice that under the, under the product table, there's category. So we open our product table and there is category. Now, when we select category, what we want to do is to bring category under rows. So there are two ways in which you could do it. You can actually just highlight the categories table, and here it brings it under the rows. If, however, you wanted to bring categories as a column, then you just move it. You can click, drag, and hold and move it under the columns table. But we're not going to be doing that right now. So here you'll see on your screen that so far we have data by way of the 4 categories. Now, we might also want to look at, let's go back to our example. And here under reseller, we're doing an analysis of business type. So we could, for example, say we would like to analyze the business type, but we would like the business type to be a column. So we could say reseller, and here it is business type. But when we select business type, you'll notice here that business type now landed itself under columns and here. So let's make a little format change. I'm going to highlight the format and then expand the grid drop down because I want to make this a little bit bigger for us. So for our text size, I'm increasing it. Good. Right. So this should be more visually pleasing for you. So what I did was just simply hit the format painter and then went and looked for the text size and changed it. So I'm now back into my fields list. So I'm saying here that for my matrix, I would like to represent my raw data using categories. So here there are 4 categories. And I would also like to use the business type as my columnar data. And my business type has actually 4 categories as well. One called not applicable, specialty bike shops, value added, and warehouse. So where would my values come from? Well, if you should look back at our example, you'll notice that sales, the sales table has sales amount and an interesting notation to the left of the field, which is called the sigma. Now, the reason why the sigma is shown is because in the data query model, the sales amount was represented as a decimal number. So the system automatically knows that because it was properly formatted, good, when the data came over as a number or rather a decimal value, then it automatically put the word sigma, which therefore means that you're able to sum the data. So if we again go to our sales table, I'm looking for sales. And then we're saying here that what we want is our sales amount. And if I should highlight it. So what do we have here? If we look at the fields list, we're saying that the matrix grid has the following groups or group settings in the rows property. Good. In our fields for rows, you can use category. And for columns, we can use the business type. And for values, which is what we want to compute, is a sales amount. So looking at our data, we're seeing here that we have just simply done a simple analysis where we're able to represent our data by way of our categories, but with each column being the business type. Now, this is good. This is good in the sense that it is tabular data, and there are many people who would like to analyze their data just using tables. But what if you may have a management team that probably would like to do analysis of this data in a more graphical representation. Is there some way that we could represent this data more in a graphic form that is able to not only tell this kind of information, but maybe even more? And the answer is yes. So what we're going to do is we're going to change up the format of our matrix. It's still the matrix. So if you notice for our rows, currently we only are using one field for the rows, but we have the business type as our columns. What I'm going to do is to move the business type from the columns and to bring it on the rows. And you'll see here now that I've now created a grouping and a subgrouping. So under accessories, I can now click the button under accessories and to expand it. And I'm now seeing these fields, which were before represented as columns, they are now represented as a subgrouping under accessories. And likewise, if I did the same thing for bikes and also clothing. Good. So this is good. So that's a good start. But if you may remember, when we looked at our example had not only the listing in our categories, but we were able to analyze our sales amount using what seems to be bar data. So let's see what we can do. So we're going to do an additional transformation right here on our canvas, in that our sales amount, rather than being represented as just tabular data, then what we're going to do is to see if we can incorporate some visual, because right now, unless you were looking at the physical data and reading, you would not know, for example, which category represented your highest sales. And you wouldn't know from within each category which business type represented your highest sales. So let's do this. If we should look at our sales amount, there's an arrow to the right of the sales amount field. When I click that arrow, I'm now able to see some listings. And interestingly, what is the check mark here that is by default is that you want to sum the values. It could be that you didn't want to sum the values, but you wanted to list the average of the values, maybe the minimum, the maximum, or to do a distinct count, or to work out the standard deviation, variance, etc. So these are all the options which are available to you to decide how you represent our sales amount. But we don't want to change our sales amount because we recognize that the sales amount is fine. What we want to do is to apply what is called a conditional formatting. So under conditional formatting, there are different things that can be done. You can apply different background colors based on certain conditions, or I should state, by using the word conditional formatting, what you're saying is this: you will be doing some kind of format changing to your data, but it will not be standard format changes. Those format changes are going to be dependent on some condition which is happening to the data, whether if it is the highest data, the smallest data, the data with the largest variance, etc. So the kind of formatting that we're going to be doing is one called data bars. So I'm selecting the data bars. And in selecting the data bars, the data bars formatting window comes up. So here we see that we're going to be applying a format to our data bars. Now I can choose to only show the bar or not. If I show the bar only, this means that my data, when it's represented, will only be bars going across, but no data. but I want both the bar and the data to be shown. And based on my data, what I'm saying here is that I'm going to be using the lowest value going to the highest value. So I could either choose the defaults which are there, or I could choose a custom. Now, if I choose custom, I'm going to be expected to enter the value which represents the lowest value. And if I were to choose custom on the maximum, I would have to use the highest value. But I'm not giving it a range. I'm just simply saying use the lowest value and the highest value. And if my bar is positive, I want it to use this blue bar. If my numbers rather are positive, I want to use this blue bar. If they are negative, however, I want them to use this gradient bar. So, and my bar direction by way of intensity will move from left to right. Here are other options where I could actually choose left, right to left. So now I've said, okay, I'm going to be using my data bars, and I click OK. I'm seeing here now a little bit better in my representation, but it's a little bit too small. We probably need to space it out. So what will I do? I just simply go to the report header, to the double arrow, click, hold, and drag this across. Now things look much better. Good. So this now is a better visualization in the sense that I'm able to use the grid. I'm better able to use the grid, to use the matrix, and using bars, I'm now better able to look at a visual representation. So from here, I'm able to tell that most of my sales across the categories, let's open the components, good. What I'm seeing here is a visualization which now gives me a very good interpretation. I'm able to see that most of my sales are bikes. So there are more bike sales than there are in components. And there are more components sales as they are when compared with clothing and accessories. And even within bikes, I'm able to tell that my highest sales comes from value-added resellers. Good. As again, selling from my warehouse or from the specialty bike shop. So from this analysis alone, I'm able to tell that the best business for me is bikes and using resellers. So in other words, I might sell to a reseller who has a distribution company who then sells it again to the final customer. So strategically, I would now have to make an analysis to see, okay, what is wrong then? Why am I not selling as much in components or by way of clothing or accessories? Is it that my bike sales based on the dollar value, they tend to therefore, they have a higher dollar value amount? So therefore, hence why my sales would tend to be bigger? I don't know. But what this visualization has done is that it has made a visual representation to analyze your data. Remember when we started, we just looked at an Excel spreadsheet with just so much data. But now that we're able to just simply use one visualization in Power BI, which is the matrix visualization, you are now able to, in doing this analysis, you are able to provide answers, or if not even provide answers, it now actually encourages you by raising even more questions, right? So therefore, any additional analysis that is to be done. Now, the final thing I'd like to show you, good, you'll notice that in the values again, we have here the sales amount. This is where we went for conditional formatting. So there are others which I said you could use, which is maybe the font color, for example. You could have different colors for different sales amounts. Good. So therefore, as the sales values get more, the get a high, as your sales values get a higher value, then it changes colors. But then we need to be cognizant of this menu option, which is called remove conditional formatting. Once you have created a conditional formatting and you want to remove it, you do not remove it by going to conditional formatting, but you actually remove it by going to the option which says remove conditional formatting. And then you're able, as you'll notice, the data bars is highlighted. So by you clicking the data bars, it will remove that conditional formatting that you have there and bring it back to standard. Well, that's it, the time that we have today. I know that as I said, your time, it's very, very precious. And you actually chose the time to actually stay with us. So we appreciate it. We appreciate it greatly. And remember, if you have any questions on the product, the Power BI product, or any other product, please feel free to reach out to Gabriel or Macarena rather, sorry.